In this penultimate section of The Ages of Life, the final chapter of Counsels and Maxims, Schopenhauer praises the life of old age and talks about its many advantages. These chiefly flow from the fact that in old age a person has given up the illusions that have distorted his judgment about the world and about himself when he's young. Schopenhauer also defends old age against the mistaken belief that it is necessarily a time of disease and boredom. And he takes up the question of self-sufficiency again. It is in old age when a person seems to have to rely most fully upon what he is in himself instead of what the world gives to him. This section ends with a nice Spanish proverb about living a long life. Here's how Schopenhauer begins. In these later years, and not before, a man comes to a true appreciation of Horace's maxim, nil admirari, that is, let yourself be surprised by nothing. He is directly and sincerely convinced of the vanity of everything, and that all the glories of the world are as nothing. His illusions are gone. He is no more beset with the idea that there is any particular amount of happiness anywhere, in the palace or in the cottage, any more than he himself enjoys when he is free from bodily or mental pain. The worldly distinctions of great and small, high and low, exist for him no longer, and in this blissful state of mind, the old man may look down with a smile upon all false notions. He is completely undeceived, and knows that whatever may be done to adorn human life and to deck it out in finery, its paltry character will soon show through the glitter of its surroundings, and that, paint and bejewel it as one may, it remains everywhere much the same, an existence which has no true value except in freedom from pain, and is never to be estimated by the presence of pleasure, let alone then of display. So, in the first paragraph here, Schopenhauer, a nice, eloquent praise of old age, sort of looking down upon the falsehoods of the world, having finally been able, in some measure, to transcend and escape them, and knowing that the only real value in life is to be free from pain. So I look at a very wealthy person, I look at Elon Musk, and I say, well, is he free from pain? If yes, then he's just as well off as I, who am also free from pain. That's the only good to be sought in this life. The fact that he's wealthy, that experiences pleasure in excess of mine, the greater amount of pleasure means nothing. Seems to be what Schopenhauer is saying. The old person is capable of seeing and truly believing. So, continuing now. Disillusion is the chief characteristic of old age. For by that time the fictions are gone which gave life its charm and spurred on the mind to activity. The splendors of the world have been proved null and vain. Its pomp, grandeur, and magnificence are faded. A man has then found out that behind most of the things he wants, and most of the pleasures he longs for, there is very little after all. And so he comes by degrees to see that our existence is all empty and void. It is only when he is 70 years old that he quite understands the first words of the preacher. That was, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And this again explains why it is that old men are sometimes fretful and morose. It is often said that the common lot of old age is disease and weariness of life. Disease is by no means essential to old age, especially when a really long span of years is to be attained. For as life goes on, the conditions of health and disorder tend to increase. Crescente vita crescit sanitas et morbus. That as life increases, health and death increase, health and disease increase. And as far as weariness or boredom is concerned, I have stated above why old age is even less exposed to that form of evil than youth. But we remember that, right? Youth, because of its fast-moving time, is susceptible to boredom. Time moves by at a different pace for the old, so they're not subject to it as much. Nor is boredom by any means to be taken as a necessary accompaniment of that solitude, which, for reasons that do not require to be explained, old age certainly cannot escape. It is rather the fate that awaits those who have never known any other pleasures but the gratification of the senses and the delights of society, who have left their minds unenlightened and their faculties unused. And this is Schopenhauer's reply to the charge, maybe the common belief that old people are subject to boredom. One, no, it's young people who are rather more subject to boredom. But two, now, there is a certain amount of solitude which inevitably comes with old age, but that is only a source of boredom for people who have not developed their intellectual faculties sufficiently. People who have lived a sensuous life or a sociable life, find all their pleasures in the body or in the company of others. Well, plainly, those people, when the solitude that is inevitable in old age comes upon them, those people will suffer. But one need not suffer like that, and a person who is growing old can, by the right kind of intellectual practice and enlightenment, uh, learn to endure it. So he goes on. It is quite true that the intellectual faculties decline with the approach of old age, but where they were originally strong, there will always be enough left to combat the onslaught of boredom. And then again, as I have said, experience, knowledge, reflection, and skill in dealing with men combine to give an old man an increasingly accurate insight into the ways of the world. His judgment becomes keen, and he attains a coherent view of life. His mental vision embraces a wider range. Constantly finding new uses for his stores of knowledge, and adding to them at every opportunity, he maintains uninterrupted that inward process of self-education which gives employment and satisfaction to the mind, and thus forms the due reward of all its efforts. The point here again being that disease is not the necessary accompaniment of old age, neither is boredom. Boredom afflicts the sociable and the sensual. The person who has practiced the right kind of intellectual discipline will find that his powers are near their peak, with the great store of good judgment, of prudence, of experience. He sees the world more and more accurately. He's able to behave in a more canny way in making correct judgments about how things are going to turn out. He should constantly find new fields of application for his knowledge. Going on now. All this serves, in some measure, as a compensation for decreased intellectual power. And besides, time, as I have remarked, seems to go much more quickly when we are advanced in years. And this, in itself, is a preventative of boredom. There is no great harm in the fact that a man's bodily strength decreases in old age, unless indeed he requires it to make a living. To be poor when one is old is a great misfortune. If a man is secure from that, and retains his health, old age may be a very passable time of life. Its chief necessity is to be comfortable and well off, and in consequence money is then prized more than ever, because it is a substitute for failing strength. This next part's great. Deserted by Venus, the old man likes to turn to Bacchus to make him merry. In place of wanting to see things, to travel, and to learn, comes the desire to speak and teach. It is a piece of good fortune if the old man retains some of his love of study, or of music, or of the theatre; if, in general, he is still somewhat susceptible to the things about him, as is indeed the case with some people to a very late age. At that time of life, what a man has in himself is of greater advantage to him than ever it was before. And I would just add, this is because bodily strength decreases, sociability decreases, you are deprived of the pleasures of the senses and the pleasures of sociability, of other people's company. This is part of the inevitable solitude of old age, that what you have in yourself is makes up a greater and greater portion of whatever kind of life you can live. If you are a good self, an excellent self, if you have maintained yourself, you will be able to pass your old age in relative comfort and ease. If you are if you've taken poor care of yourself, when you're left alone with yourself, you will find it rather difficult. Okay, going on now. There can be no doubt that most people who have never been anything but dull and stupid become more and more of automata as they grow old. They have always thought, said, and done the same things as their neighbors, and nothing that happens now can change their disposition or make them act otherwise. To talk to old people of this kind is like writing in the sand. If you produce any impression at all, it is gone almost immediately. Old age is here nothing but the caput mortuum of life. The phrase literally means dead head, but it refers to a kind of worthless residue left behind after a chemical reaction. So it's kind of the residue of life. All that is essential to manhood is gone. There are cases in which nature supplies a third set of teeth in old age, thereby apparently demonstrating the fact that that period of life is a second childhood. I have to say, I have no idea what Schopenhauer is referring to. Perhaps that's an established medical fact. Perhaps it's just a sort of urban legend of mid-19th century Germany. I couldn't say. It is certainly a very melancholy thing that all a man's faculties tend to waste away as he grows old, and at any rate that and at a rate that increases in rapidity. But still, this is a necessary, nay, a beneficial arrangement, for otherwise death, for which it is a preparation, would be too hard to bear. So the greatest boon that follows the attainment of extreme old age is euthanasia, an easy death, not ushered in by disease, and free from all pain and struggle. There's a footnote here. Footnote says, see Weltanschauung und Vorstellung, Book 2, Chapter 41, for a further description of this happy end to life. Let me get to the end of this paragraph, and then I'll tell you more about that footnote. For let a man live as long as he may, he is never conscious of any moment but the present, one and indivisible. And in those late years the mind loses more every day by sheer forgetfulness than it ever gains anew. That's the end of this paragraph about euthanasia. What Schopenhauer has said so far here is that our faculties, it is actually beneficial to us that our faculties decline, and somewhat rapidly, as we approach death. If we maintained our faculties vivid and sharp right up to the end, death would be difficult or impossible to bear. So he holds out this possibility of euthanasia, not meaning here medically assisted death, but meaning a good death, dying well, which for him means dying free of pain, discomfort, and distress. And he says, check out Book 2, Chapter 41 of The World as Will and Representation. I happen to have Book 2 of Word as Will of that book here, and I looked up the passage he's talking about in Chapter 41. It is on page 469 of this Dover edition, the Payne translation. Here's some of what he says there, and then I'll go back to Counsels and Maxims. On page 468, at the start of this paragraph, he says, according to this, what makes death so terrible for us is not so much the end of life, for this cannot seem to anyone specially worthy of regret, as the destruction of the organism, really because this organism is the will itself manifested as body. Okay, we remember that will for Schopenhauer is a bad thing. This is the sort of the struggle of life, the sort of cosmic force striving towards what can never be attained. Okay, let me skip ahead a little bit. Let me do a little bit more here in 468. But actually, we feel this destruction only in the evils of illness or of old age, On the other hand, for the subject, death itself consists merely in the moment when consciousness vanishes, since the activity of the brain ceases. The extension of the stoppage to all the other parts of the organism which follows this is really already an event after death. Therefore, in a subjective respect, death concerns only consciousness. He goes on to talk in the middle of this paragraph about violent death, and then he talks about peaceful death. And here's the passage you referred to in that footnote just a moment ago. And finally, even death through natural causes, proper, death through old age, euthanasia, is a gradual vanishing and passing out of existence in an imperceptible manner. In old age, passions and desires, together with the susceptibility to their objects, are gradually extinguished. The emotions no longer find any excitement, for the power to make representations or mental pictures becomes weaker and weaker, and its images feebler. The impressions no longer stick to us, but pass away without a trace. The days roll by faster and faster, events lose their significance, everything grows pale. The old man, stricken in years, totters about or rests in a corner, now only a shadow, a ghost of his former self. What still remains there for death to destroy? One day a slumber is his last, and his dreams are blank. They are the dreams that Hamlet asks about in the famous monologue. I believe that we dream them just now. Okay, I think that's a good place to stop there. You can check out more of chapter 41 of book 2 of The World as Will and Representation if you want to know more of Schopenhauer's thoughts about death. Let me go back to the final pages of this section from Counsels and Maxims. Thanks for indulging me for that interlude there. So where were we? The mind loses more every day by sheer forgetfulness than it ever gains anew. So the decline of our intellectual powers is actually quite good for us, right? It prepares us for death. It allows us to just sort of slip effortlessly into nothingness, as was described just a moment ago. Going on. The main difference between youth and age will always be that youth looks forward to life and old age to death. And that while the one has a short past and a long future before it, the case is just the opposite with the other. It is quite true that when a man is old, to die is the only thing that awaits him, while if he is young, he may expect to live. And the question arises, which of the two fates is the more hazardous? And if life is not a matter which, on the whole, it is better to have behind one than before. Does not the preacher say, the day of death is better than the day of one's birth? It is certainly a rash thing to wish for a long life. For, as the Spanish proverb has it, it means to see much evil. Quien larga vida vive, mucho mal vide. Whoever lives a long life sees much evil. Okay. That's the end of the section here, but I wanted to make two more comments about what Schopenhauer has said. It occurs to me, he's got a sort of nice, eloquent passage here about the young man has much life ahead of him, the old man has only death ahead of him, and who has the better of it at that moment. And it seems to me almost here that Schopenhauer is kind of imitating Socrates as Plato presents him in Apology, who says at the end, after he's been condemned, the last lines of Apology, in fact, we part now, I to die and you to live, and who has the better lot is known only to the god. I think Schopenhauer here is kind of imitating that, but saying actually it's just the opposite of what you might have thought in terms of Socrates. It is, in fact, the man facing death. Perhaps that's precisely what you might have thought reading Apology. And then the last thing here, there is a footnote here in that final sentence with the Spanish proverb where he says, it is certainly a rash thing to live for a long life. There's a long footnote here by Schopenhauer, and I'll conclude this video with that. The life of man cannot, strictly speaking, be called either long or short, since it is the ultimate standard by which duration of time in regard to all other things is measured. In one of the Vedic Upanishads, the natural length of human life is put down at 100 years. And I believe this to be right. I have observed, as a matter of fact, that it is only people who exceed the age of 90 who attain euthanasia, who die, that is to say, of no disease, apoplexy, or convulsion, and pass away without agony of any sort. Nay, who sometimes even show no pallor, but expire generally in a sitting attitude, and often after a meal. Or, I may say, simply cease to live rather than die. To come to one's end before the age of 90 means to die of disease, in other words, prematurely. Now, the Old Testament puts the limit of human life at 70, and if it is very long, at 80 years. And what is more noticeable still, Herodotus says the same thing. But this is wrong. And the error is due simply to a rough and superficial estimate of the results of daily experience. For if the natural length of life were from 70 to 80 years, people would die, about that time, of mere old age. Now this is certainly not the case. If they die then, they die, like younger people, of disease. And disease is something abnormal. Therefore, it is not natural to die at that age. It is only when they are between 90 and 100 that people die of old age. Die, I mean, without suffering from any disease or showing any special signs of their condition, such as a struggle, death rattle, convulsion, pallor, the absence of all of which constitutes euthanasia. The natural length of a human life is 100 years, and in assigning that limit, the Upanishads are right once more. Those are the final words, that long footnote from the final sentence of this part of the ages of life towards the end of Counsels and Maxims. All that remains in this chapter and in this book is a short 2-page section comparing the ages of human life to the planets. And that's a very interesting section I'll be anxious to share with you in the next video. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.